Antiquity Unveiled, the most marvelous revelations of the 19th century concerning the origin of Christianity, by Jonathan M. Roberts. Oh, I keep forgetting his middle name, but it's on the meme, isn't it? Pliny the Younger. Sir, there is nothing to a spirit. We never grow old, but we are cramped by our mortal conditions. I was appointed to the position of consul, or procurator of Bithynia and Pontus about the last part of the first century of the Common Era. Well, okay, they're saying Christian era, but never mind. I'm just going to correct. By Trajan of Rome, and as I am an important witness in the settlement of the dispute concerning the reality of Jesus Christ, I come here today by the invitation of a Persian sage, Aronimar. The latter is the controlling guide of the medium, one of the greatest proofs that the Christians bring forward to the establishment of the historical existence of Jesus is my letter to Trajan. I did write such a letter, but the name Christian was not to be found in it. That word is a forgery. The word I used was Essenes, not Christians. The cause of my inquiry into the nature of the customs of the sect calling themselves Essenes was, as they were what you would moderns call communists, and Trajan wanted to know whether they interfered with the rights of other people. I found them a very quiet and inoffensive class of people, holding everything in common, and I so reported to the emperor. I had no knowledge whatever of the so-called Christian religion. I do not come here in malice to give this communication, but I do come because I wish to testify to the truth. As I hope for future happiness, I affirm that what I have stated here is the positive and the absolute truth. I have fulfilled my mission. Sign me Pliny the Younger. If that communication is genuine, then the disputed points as to the letter of Pliny to Trajan are clearly explained and set at rest. That is genuine, I confidently believe. The letter to Trajan was by Pliny, but made no reference to a sect called Christians, but to the sect of the Essenes. Essenes after the purifiers, the perfectors. I forget which Aramaic word we're talking about, but Essenes. But there was a bunch of different groups like that. It was a so-called Greek title. I can't find anything in Aramaic that would directly answer the question as such. Essenes, but the Slavonites was definitely one group of so-called Essenes, from whom the Christian priesthood borrowed much of what they claim was divine and infallible truth. The Essenes were not Christians, having existed as a sect long before the alleged birth of their God-man, and possibly before Judaism even. Refer to the Biographie Universelle for the sketch of Pliny the Younger. For the letter, refer to Biblical, Theological, and Ecclesiastical Encyclopedia of McClintock and Strong. Who can read that letter attributed to Pliny as set forth in the above work, and believe that he, the friend and proconsul of the beneficent and gentle Trajan, ever wrote it. From beginning to end, okay, there's an issue with the page number. It's supposed to say 88 instead of 83. Beginning to end, here bears the marks of the pious errors of the Christian priesthood, who sought to find or produce some plausible historical evidence that Jesus had an existence at some time and in some place, but they have manifested greater desperation of ever being able to produce such evidence, in seeking to make Pliny a witness for them, than we supposed possible. These pretended Christians of Bithynia, Ampanius, Pliny is made to tell us, worshipped the image of Trajan and the statues of the gods, and that the temples of the pagan Romans, which had been almost forsaken, began to be more frequented, and the sacred pagan solemnities, after a long interval, had revived, that victims for sacrifice were brought up, whereas for a long time there were few purchasers. What kind of Christians were those? So let's remember that the Romans that lived in the city called the people did not regard, it wasn't pagan, it wasn't heathen to have these well stone built and such houses. Pagan and heathen, oh yeah, you can make the heathen homes and the pagan homes can be well built, but the more of patched material instead of straight up boards, like the patches sealed on this roof might be considered pagan. Heathens would weave the rushes and pour pitch and all sorts of stuff. And pagan and heathen just doesn't match as a type of religion. In the light of the above communication of the spirit of Pliny, and the internal evidence of fraud and forgery in the letter attributed to Pliny, we may conclude beyond all doubt or question that the letter was a pious fraud of a most unpardonable character. It is no wonder that the independent investigations of Christian evidences have regarded it as spurious. Pliny says he did write a letter to Trajan, reporting the result of his investigation of the practices of a religious sect of communists calling themselves Essenes, made at the request of the Roman Emperor Trajan. Now, they weren't calling themselves Essenes, they were calling themselves Thodikites, and other such things. Calling themselves righteous. Made at the request of the Roman Emperor Trajan, and that he found them a quite inoffensible people. That this is certain the historical character of the Essenes will show, and that of these few facts, the spurious letter was manufactured. Is there any limit to the baseness of the founders of the Christian religion? We have failed to reach it yet. And Herodotus, Pliny, Plutarch, it can be said that Tonic is actually a better claim on history than a lot of that stuff, but that's not quite when we start getting to Jesus and his divinity and texts associated with that, the historicity doesn't hold up as well as those ones, and so it's important that I mention Pliny here. Well, it's in the book. Applied to the Mystico-Ascetics, the Ascenis, the letter of Pliny, becomes most appropriate and intelligible, but is applied to the Christian sect wholly irrelevant and absurd. But in the light of the explanation contained in the foregoing communication, the true import of Pliny's letter becomes clear, and that as late as the beginning of the 2nd century of the Common Era, no such person as Jesus Christ was known, and no such people as Christians had ever been heard of. Thus do facts pile up to show the magnitude of the religious fraud under the title of Christianity has been practiced upon the civilized world. In view of such spiritual developments as the above, if it is asked, of what use is spiritualism? We in turn ask, of what use is truth? And if we look at the evidence of these things, it's not so much that it didn't exist. We can probably say that it did exist in the 1st century, and definitely in the 2nd century when you had these Gospels being written. Well, the Gospel of John had its first versions in the 90s. But we look at this, and what do we find? We find something along the lines of, yes, they're picking up from other groups and claiming their fame, claiming this, trying to mesh in their teachings, or individuals trying to privately work out these teachings and passing them on and off as their own. And their movement survives and the other doesn't, and then they blossom up greatly because the other one disappeared, and they're carrying on these teachings that kind of faded away, and they revive them. But are they their teachings? No. Was Paul the founder of his own teachings? If Paul exists, as some evidence seems to say, as someone other than Apollonius, it seems that Paul largely borrowed. And yes, I do think that Paul probably philosophized a bit. But here are some alternative lookings at things. And why would we be left in such a state of doubt about whether or not it's true? If this was supposed to be the end-all revelation, like some Christians erroneously interpret, oh yeah, and remember, Ascenis because Greek, right? And I'm sorry if I don't quite get some time. There's different languages being used. Is this Italian? Is this what? I'm not seeing Greek characters. I'm not seeing Aramaic characters. What? So I'm doing my best to pronounce things. And if I pronounce things weird, sometimes it's because I'm saying, wait, this is Greek, so let's give it a more Greek sound. But I don't have the Greek characters, so I can't be absolutely certain at the moment that I'm reading this book. If I did research, that'd be a different story.